Welcome everyone. As most of you probably know, my name is Igor Akvovo. I am a designer in OLAP. Happy Friday, everyone. I hope that your week has been productive. Here in OLAP, we've had a great week with our online learning week event. That's what Dr. Johnston was referring to a few minutes ago with Michelle. One thing I wanted to kind of share with us today is I'm putting together the spring brown bag schedule. And as we all know, we started this brown bag series back in fall 2020. And these brown bags have been very successful due to you, faculty, staff, and grad students. And there are a few spots left for the spring schedule. And inviting you, asking you if you would to contact me if you like to lead a session in spring. And so please do that. Feel free to email me. I think everybody here has my email address, and I will be glad to meet with you if you are not sure about what you want to present, but you're not sure about a topic or something that you're doing. I'll gladly meet with you, and so we can go over a few ideas. I would also like to acknowledge my OLAP colleagues who are here. First, Dr. Jason Johnston, the Director of Online Program Course Production, my colleague Chris Emberton, who is an instructional designer in OLAP. I think our Josh Steele is here, right? Yes, Josh Steele, who is here, the AVP of Online Learning. And thank you, my colleagues, for being here. And thank you again, faculty and staff and grad students who are here today. Finally, this session today will be recorded and will be available on our website next week, along with other recordings. And so if some of you are here for the first time today and are interested in watching previous sessions, the recordings are on our website. And feel free to go on our website and watch those. And so we have a great session today on UDL. I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Dr. Michelle Violanti to introduce herself and get us started. Michelle, take it away.
Thanks, Igor. My name is Michelle Violanti, and I'm an associate professor in communication studies. I've been at the university, this is my 28th year. And I started in arts and sciences, and then we moved over to communication and information, which has been a great move for us. I have to say, I'm really excited to be the end or kind of the bookend for the OLAP showcase this week. It started on Tuesday, and I found it to be extremely beneficial. If you have an opportunity to go back and see any of those sessions, particularly from Tuesday that were recorded, I would highly recommend it. What I'm going to talk to you today about is assessment and making sure that your assessments are accessible to all of our students and that they meet the needs of all of our students. Okay, so the title of the presentation is All-Vol Assessment. And you'll see here on this first slide on the right-hand side, there is an image of stars. So does something get 1 star, 2 star, 3 stars, 4 stars, 5 stars? You will hear me at various points in time during the course of this presentation describe things that may not be visually accessible to some of our participants. That is part of the UDL process, is making sure that particularly when we have images or we have information that somebody who has a visual impairment cannot see, we make that accessible to them. So you will hear me describe slides, you will hear me describe different kinds of things as we go along, and that's part of the process. I think we're all pretty familiar with both formative and summative assessments, which are the first 2 bullet points. Formative assessments tend to be those low-stake kinds of things that we do with students to see or mark their progress toward learning. And summative assessments tend to be the ones that we use to determine at the end of some set of information or some set of skills, whether they have accomplished the goals that we set forward for them in that particular amount of time or amount of content. While everything that I talk about today can refer to formative and summative assessments, I'm going to focus primarily on evaluative and reflective assessments. So evaluative and reflective assessments tend to be the kinds of things that we do to see whether our students have achieved larger outcomes. So maybe it's course outcomes, maybe it's program outcomes. And usually when we are doing that, there is some kind of a reflective process, whether that's done by the faculty member or by the students themselves. So when I'm talking about assessment today, I'm really talking about the larger types of assessment that go beyond the formative and summative assessments that we use in our courses. On the next slide, we're going to talk about some of those assessment processes, and the image that is here on the right-hand side for you is a computer screen with Canvas and some of the various things that you can do with Canvas and the tools that are available. Everything that I talk about today can be done within Canvas because that is our learning management system, and I don't want to be using things that are not easily accessible to both our students and to our faculty, and that aren't necessarily supported. One of the things that we tend to have difficulty with, or at least I do, is when somebody gives me this great tool and then I have no background on how to use it. So for example, during the pandemic in particular, people talked about, oh, I used Flipgrid and I used OBS to do my screen captures and my online lectures. But we don't necessarily have the support for all of those different kinds of things. So it's important, I think, to use processes that we can support. So within Canvas, one of the things that I do, and I'll show you how I set this up in my Canvas site after I kind of talk through what's going on, is modalities. My students all have the option to complete assessments in one of 4 modalities. So they can write their responses, they can, in a remote location, they don't have to come into a proctored site to do this, but they can write their responses, they can type their responses, they can audio or video record their responses. Oh, and they can draw or visually represent their responses. And I set all of these up within Canvas and use Proctorio as kind of part of the proctoring process. Not so much because I'm looking to catch them cheating as much as it helps me see what processes they're using as they take the exam. So all of those modalities are available to them for any of the assessments that we complete. Some of the strengths of this process, it allows people to do what works best for them. The majority of my students will still choose to type their answers, but I'm finding more and more people who are experimenting with visual responses as well as recorded responses. Some people just work better when they're talking than they do when they're writing or typing. So this also allows us to address some of the potential problems that students may have in terms of disabilities or just in terms of not necessarily something that goes as far as a disability, but it's still more difficult or challenging for them to do it. So my students, for example, who have motor skills, fine motor skill difficulties, typing is not always easy for them, neither is writing, which is why the recorded response gives them the flexibility to be able to do what's going to work best for them. Now, I would love to tell you that this is all easy and it's fun and games. However, there are lots of challenges associated with providing multiple modalities. First of all, students have to decide before the exam which way they're going to take the exam so that you can set it up correctly within Canvas. The second challenge is that what I'm learning, particularly with our traditional age students, is that they don't like to make decisions. They want somebody to tell them, do it this way and do it only this way, because this is the right way to do it. So it does take some practice. And what I try to do to to get them more comfortable with the options is to set up small assignments leading up to an exam, for example, that require them to use each of the modalities just so that they can see them and try them out for themselves, in the hopes that it will help them make better informed decisions. Another challenge can be technology. I haven't run into this issue as much since we've come back from the pandemic and we have more students on campus and fewer students on the network. I haven't had as many technology issues where people needed more bandwidth than they could get access to. But that is always something to keep in the back of your mind as a potential challenge associated with giving them options in terms of modalities. Once you decide that you're going to engage in this assessment process, you have to figure out what kinds of tools you're going to use. So the next slide is tools. And I'm going to talk a little bit about Canvas, and I'm also going to talk a little bit about Materia, which is an add-on that is available to us in Canvas. So what you see there is one of Materia's kind of logo shots. When we talk about Materia, you can use instructor-generated Materia. And so that would be where I go in and create my own assessments. And I'm going to show you a couple of examples of assessments that I have created through Materia to engage students, but also to give them some authentic assessments. So it's putting them in actual situations that they might find themselves in and asking them to kind of work their way through it. And it's done through what we call choose your own adventure, which reminds me of those books that we read growing up. Maybe you didn't read them, but I did, where you would get to the bottom of a page and says, if you want to do this, go to page this. And if you want to do this, go to a different page. And that's kind of what this allows you to do within the online environment. The other thing that we don't see done as often, but can be just as valuable, is student-generated materia or assessments, where they're creating the assessment. One of the things that we know is students who can teach material to others have clearly learned the material. So setting up situations where they're able to create something that would be used or could be used to teach other students about a particular topic is also beneficial for doing assessment. It also allows them to use tools that make sense to them. Flashcards don't necessarily work for me, but for some students, they're extremely beneficial. I get bored with flashcards relatively easily, and so that's why I don't personally use them. But I've certainly seen my students use them in good and strong ways to demonstrate knowledge. All right, while I switch over to Canvas, is there anything? And how great. Okay, this may be somewhat to be answered today during the session, but I would love to see examples of student answers in the 4 different representations you mentioned: writing, typing, audio, video, and visual, and how grading goes for each of those modules. Okay, I can't show you the actual responses because when I go into Canvas to get to those responses, it's going to reveal student information that I'm not allowed to reveal. But if you let me know afterwards, Jason, I'm happy to send you like an audio file and a typed file and a written version. I have yet to have a student draw, but I figure it's coming as we get more and more creative students. I figure there will be somebody somewhere down the road who does that. In terms of grading, I actually find the audio recorded ones to be the fastest and easiest ones to grade. Because I'm not trying to decipher anything. I'm just listening to the response. Most of the responses are essay in nature when they audio or video record. And so I can just listen through the entire answer and then type my feedback to them. Okay, so this is my current Canvas site, and I've taken material off it for the time being, just so that I can show you how to stick it in there if you haven't done this before. So if you scroll down in your site to settings and go to navigation and scroll down to the very bottom, Materia is there and you can enable it. And once you save it, it will appear on your right hand or on your left hand side navigation as an option. Now, when you go to Materia, it actually takes you to a new site. Oh, whoa. Before we go to Materia, let me at least show you how I set up the exam. Sorry, my mistake. I was ahead of myself. Okay, so exam one, you have exam one type. Some students prefer to come to campus and do that, and that's fine. I will allow them to do that. I choose a room on campus, usually in our office, if they want to do that. And then we have same exact exam, remotely proctored on Proctorio, which is the typed version and the recorded version. So when I click on these, they're all done through Canvas quizzes. They all look the same, and they're all set up with questions that look exactly the same. So they have their boxes. I love Canvas when it's simple, not always. So they all see exactly the same directions. They all see the same questions. And those who are recording have the option to upload a file. Those who are typing have a box in which to do their typing. Those who are drawing have a place to upload their images, and those who are writing take a picture of their written responses and they upload those as well. So the quizzes or the tests themselves pretty much work exactly the same way through the Canvas quizzes option. Now my favorite part. So when you click on Materia, it takes you here and it gives you the option to make your own widgets. As you can see, I am on a laptop. If you are on a larger screen, you would not have to do anywhere near as much scrolling as I do. But on a 13-inch screen, not everything fits super well. And so when we get into Materia, they have examples of all of the different types of what they call widgets that you can use. The two that I'm going to show you today are adventure up here, which I call choose your own adventure, with respect to scenarios. And then the other one that I'm going to show you is called Sort It Out. And that is a sorting game for the students. We have an assessment in our program where students need to be able to attach theories to their philosophical perspectives. And so basically at the end of the semester, I send them to this widget. It is ungraded because it's used only for program assessment purposes. And they go through and they sort it out. And whatever score they get is what gets recorded for our SACS assessment in particular. Some of you may also have professional accreditation assessments that you need to do. And this is a place that you can do that in a way that's a little bit more engaging than just a traditional Canvas quiz. And so for your purposes, I'm just going to kind of give you the preview version. It shows you everything about it. And when the students go in, it shows them how to play before they actually get started. And there is both an audio and a visual version of how to play. So what you can see here are, I have created cards, and each card has both the name of the theory and a visual to go with it. And the reason that I do this is because some people can remember things visually better than they can remember them textually. And so this gives them more opportunities to see what's there. And then down at the bottom are the 3 perspectives, and they have to get everything into the correct folder, is essentially what it boils down to. I'm just going to put them in folders so you can see what it looks like without probably getting very many of them right. And this, I believe this particular one also has keyboard options for students so that they can so that rather than dragging and dropping, they have the option to put them into the folders with keystrokes, which are easier for our students, particularly our students who use boards, whether they're talk boards or special keyboards. And then at the end, it says you've done all of the pieces and it gives you the option to submit. And as you can see, when you don't pay attention to what you're doing, you don't always do very well. Canvas gives you the option to, if you want this to be a graded assignment, to bring it in as completed or not completed, or to bring it in as an actual score. For our purposes, when we're doing assessment for the program, we're not as concerned about giving them credit for it. So it's usually a 0-point complete, not complete assignment. If we're worried that they're not going to complete it, we might make it a 1-point assignment or an extra or a bonus point kind of assignment. But that's the sorted out option within Materia. Okay, the other widget that I want to show you is probably my favorite accomplishment as in terms of designing online coursework. And I have to give a big shout out to Chris Emberton because it was based on the interactive activity that she created for my Jumpstart course that I came in here to do this kind of as the follow-up to what she had created. So I am eternally grateful to her for pushing me to even try something like this. So what you'll see when you go in here, I'm going to show you the edit version first, just so that you can get a feel for what happens. It essentially creates what is now a very small hidden decision tree. Which starts kind of at your scenario. And then each time students have the opportunity to choose something else or to choose their own version of the adventure, it branches off for them. And then the yellow dots are the information you present to them. The green dots are where they have the option to do something. And the red dots are the bottom where it tells them how well they did or how poorly they did, as the case might be. So I will walk you through my my adventure. So this adventure starts off with a manager and an employee who are in a conflict. And it shows an image of kind of a workplace environment where there might be a large meeting going on. And Latoya and Peyton are the 2 people in our conflict. So it just kind of lays out for you the nature of the workplace environment and then kind of what leads to the conflict. So Peyton must decide how to respond to the situation, and she must choose A, B, or C. to be able to respond to LaToya. And so a little bit later, probably a week later, LaToya responds with paying overtime is less expensive than paying benefits for additional employees. You should be happy you have a job with benefits. And so it continues on and asks, well, how should Peyton respond to LaToya given that? And so Peyton chooses, and again, there is a third interaction between LaToya and Peyton about working overtime. And once again, Peyton must respond to LaToya. When we get to the end of a decision tree, it gives the students the option to then find out how well they did or how poorly they did with respect to that particular situation. So in this case, when we scroll down and continue after we have gotten the feedback, it tells us that we didn't do so well. And the previous paragraph or comment is what gives the students the information then about why it was not considered well. You can set it up where they can have unlimited attempts so that they can go through a series of options. You can set it up where it, again, records completed, incomplete, or what the actual score is. It can record the best score if that is what you would prefer. So it gives you some options as the instructor to make decisions about what's going on. And if you simply want it to be an informational assessment, you can certainly do that as well. Trying to think if there's anything else I need to tell you about. Oh, that's the other thing. So the more things that they do poorly, the more decisions they typically end up with. And that's simply because you're trying to push them in some ways toward stronger answers. So on this particular choose your own adventure, they can score between 60% and 100%. If they make all good decisions about their responses from a communication perspective, they score 100%. Every time they kind of waffle or they choose things that might not be considered competent communication, that brings their score down. And as you saw, that particular combination was the worst of the scores in terms of what happened there. The last thing that I wanted to show you is kind of a student-generated material. You can also put assignments into Canvas so that the students have to go and create materials. And so you can give them options to work with the ones that make the most sense to them. I like Enigma, which is a Jeopardy based, because if you give them kind of, these are the answers, now you have to write the questions that go with them, that will tell you something about their learning. The other one that works pretty well for students to do as assignments for them or assessments for them is flashcards. But I don't do definitions on my flashcards. I give them the key terms and they have to generate flashcards with examples of those key terms. And this works across a variety of disciplines because just about any of the key terms, whether you're in English or you're in engineering or you're in business or you're in social work or you're in the law school, if you don't have an example, then knowing the term or the definition isn't going to be overly helpful. So this is another opportunity to get them to think at a higher level in terms of your assessments rather than being down at the lowest levels of learning. This pushes us up a little bit higher into the potentially application level of Bloom's taxonomy, if that is something that is of interest to you. Are there questions that I can answer for people?
There's a question in the chat from Lane.
Could the student enter their own answer into the materia, the choose your own adventure, I'm assuming? Is that right, Lane?
Yes.
It is not set up to allow them to enter their own answer if you choose multiple choice. There are other options where they can enter their own answer. So the example when you go into materia is an emergency room example where the student is a kind of a student nurse in this situation, and a patient has come into the emergency room. And some of those questions ask them, who would you turn to or who would you contact? And so if they choose the wrong person, it will branch them further down. So yes, you can have input types of responses in, there's a text-based option or a text box option for them to enter information. The difficulty with some of the text box stuff, if it's just completely open-ended, is that it doesn't import well into Canvas. And so it's a little bit more difficult to grade big open-ended kinds of questions in materia. It's not impossible, but it's more difficult than if you steer them in a particular direction, like who in the hospital would you ask? There's a limited number of choices at that point, and you can set up the branching a little bit easier when you have fewer options for them to choose from. Does that help?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
My other recommendation, if you do choose your own adventure, is don't do what I did, which is I started with my scenario and I tried to do everything out from it without planning it beforehand somewhere. And so then when I got to the bottom and I needed to start assigning point values, I couldn't remember always what had branched exactly where, which makes it a little bit more difficult when you're going back and trying to put those points in. Where if you do it, even if you do just the decision points on a piece of paper, it makes it a little bit easier for you to be able to know where you're at and how many branches you've had along the way. Because as you saw, those circles start to get smaller and smaller if you want to see your entire decision tree at one time. Any other questions that I can answer for people?
Michelle, from your experience, how long does it take you on average to create a material activity?
It depends on how involved you want your materia activity to be. Images are really important to me, and I would say that I spend more time finding images to be able to put into my materials than I do anything else. Designing the materia itself does not take me a super long time, but it's making it look the way that I want it to look, and making sure that it will be engaging and that the pictures are meaningful to the students, and that they're representative so that they can see themselves in those situations. That's what takes me the longest time. And even with, the free images that we have access to and those kinds of things, that's by far the biggest amount of my time. Somebody said storyboarding. Yes. I wish that I had storyboarded that materia that I just showed you before I sat down and actually started typing it on the computer. It would have been a quicker and easier process.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I was just going to ask, Michelle, do you have any suggestions for everybody that as far as a good way to, I know that OIT has some videos on materia. Have you come across something that you particularly like to help you as a guide through materia?
You're going to laugh at me, trial and error.
Yeah,
I go in there, I start
That's
it.
fine. Trust me, I do that many times. I'm like, I'm not going to ask for help until I try it out, and then I'll figure out what I can't figure out.
And I think part of that for me is that I want to approach it the same way that my students would approach it for the first time. And so I'm trying out like what are the obstacles that they're going to run into so that when I provide them with information about a particular assignment, I can say, be aware of these are potential problems that you're going to run into. And if I don't get through it there, like if I have problems that are beyond even my capability, I'm a YouTube video searcher because somebody has done a YouTube video, I find, on just about anything I could possibly want to do. So that's where I tend to turn. I am less inclined, I'm embarrassed to admit, to turn to the OIT resources, in part because I have so much trouble finding them on our website. I think once I find them, they're probably great resources, but I'm not usually willing to expend the amount of energy necessary to dig around on the website to find the stuff I want. You can take that out, Igor. You don't have to leave that in the recording if you don't want to.
I have a quick question for you. How
Sure.
did students respond to creating their own material? Did they like it? Did they enjoy it? Or
I take this as stepping stones. Everything is a process. And every time you introduce something new to students, it takes some time before they get used to it. When I first started giving them options for their exams, nobody would take me up on the recordings. Nobody would take me up on, well, they still don't take me up on drawing. And very few of my students wrote their responses because they were so used to the computer. But what I'm finding now is a shift that people really are, especially students who have me more than once, they're more willing to experiment with some of the other possibilities. So yeah, it's slow. Like I wouldn't put 5 materia in a course for the very first time if students haven't done it before. We usually do one in class together so that I can kind of walk them through the process. I'm a big fan of labbing things as we go. But the more people out there who do it, then the less new it'll be by the time they get to me. So
that is true.
I'll
Quick
just
question.
piggyback.
Oh, I'm
Oh,
sorry.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I have one more quick question. When you mentioned the writing, so some of the issues I've had is deciphering a student's handwriting. How do you take that into account? Because sometimes it may be mean, but I'll say if I can't read it, I can't grade it. But again, to be inclusive, to make sure that somebody has that modality to enter, what do you do?
I do require them not to use pencil. I tell them I don't care how many times you have to cross things out. I need you to use pen because I need to be able to have the contrast between your paper and the ink or the whatever color is on that paper. I was finding a lot of my students were using number 3 pencils, not number 2 pencils, and mechanical pencils that were much more difficult to decipher on paper because they also smear. And so I do require them to use black or blue or some kind of ink. I don't even care if they use colored ink. And then I have a huge magnifying glass that I will take out to help in the deciphering process. And if I get really desperate, then I will ask one of my children to help me decipher it because unlike me, they didn't learn cursive. And so they're more attuned to this notion of printing and connecting letters than I am. So I will sometimes have to call on them to decipher something for me. But for the most part, I don't usually have trouble with my students' handwriting.
You should see some of mine.
See, I teach communication, so I always have the option to tell them that if I can't read it or I can't understand it, you're not communicating effectively. And so that is an advantage to our major that you may not have in your major.
Mine always use the doctor excuse. We're doctors.
Chris, did you also have a question?
I was just going to piggyback what you mentioned earlier about, what we can do at OLAP, and, a lot of it is trial and error, but what we can do is, if you if you come to us, we can walk through some different ideas to start with an interaction and using materia, or, you know, we can, just like what we did for Michelle, we could do kind of a more intricate build for an interaction, but then that idea you could piggyback off of semester by semester with materia.
And I think that as OLAP becomes more integrated across the campus, particularly if Chancellor Plowman's initiative to have people with credits but not degrees enroll in asynchronous classes to complete degrees, I think we will see more and more of this on campus. It will become more and more familiar to faculty and to students alike. I have to tell you, yesterday I said to Igor, you didn't tell me that I was supposed to talk for an hour. I thought that this was like 20 minutes and 10 minutes of Q&A. And now it's scheduled for a whole hour. I don't have an hour worth of material. And he said, that's okay, because if we let them go a little bit early, they'll be thankful for those extra 15 minutes that they're going to get back. So thank you everybody for coming. I really appreciate it.
And thank you everyone for being here. Thank you, Michelle. One or two things I wanted to say again before we leave. Our next brown bag is on November 11th, and that's our last one of the semester. And again, for those of us who were not able to join us at noon, I'm looking for presenters for the spring semester. So please email me, reach out to me. I'll meet with you. We can talk about possible ideas for brown bags. I have a few spots left for the spring semester. And so please reach out to me. Thank you everyone for being here again today. And I hope everyone has a great weekend.